listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not so bad. You've got like this, you-know-what eating grin on your face right now.
Isn't that the way most episodes start, though?
Like usually, yeah. I think you're just like, you're like looking at me like, all right, when's he going to start talking here as we kind of get our hit the tape, to start it.
Well, it's also how my brain operates. I sit here and entertain myself with, maybe a movie clip or something that's just running in the background in my head while we wait for the recording to start. So today it was the movie Back to School. Have you ever seen that? Rodney Dangerfield?
It's been a while, right? Is this the one where he does the triple Lindy dive?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
That's the movie. But the part that entertained me just now was he has to sit down and take an exam for each of the classes he's in. And the English composition, English literature teacher, professor, really dislikes him. And he says, I only have one question for you. And he breathes a sigh of relief in 26 parts. And so that's kind of the opening that I was going to come up with today, because I was thinking about disaster recovery, and this conversation is going to go in 26 different directions. But thinking about disaster recovery, or what the cool kids call business continuity planning, right? And I was thinking of all the different places I've worked and all the business continuity disaster recovery plans that I had done, and all the time I spent doing tape backups, and, that fortunately I actually never had to enact one of those. I never had to actually take the plan and run it. I mean, that's a good thing, right? I think that's like buying life insurance and then never being able to cash it in. That means you lived a long life. So be happy. Don't be mad that you spent the money on life insurance. But what I was thinking about was that I had a next door neighbor who worked for a company called Marsh & McLennan, right? And he was the IT Windows system administrator at the Twin Towers in New York. And God bless him, on the day of 9/11, the train in front of his broke down, and he wasn't able to get onto Manhattan Island, for his normal workday. And unfortunately, his building took a direct hit, and he worked with like 250 people, and like 230 of them died. Like, there was just a small handful of people who survived. But as the IT administrator, what he would tell me was his days became restoring systems and going to like funerals or remembrance events afterwards. Here's the 26 parts, or here's one of the 26 parts. Here's where I was going with this was, then I started thinking about what was I doing on 9/11. I was an IT administrator, but I think it's always an interesting question to ask people, what were you doing on 9/11? Because I think it kind of dates you. You could be like, well, I was in third grade and I was doing X, Y, and Z. But I wonder, Jeff, I'm not sure I never asked you that question. What were you doing on 9/11?
Yeah. And thanks for starting us off on a very uplifting note here. Appreciate that. I was working for Walgreens. I was working as part of the service desk, or help center as they called it. And, this was a building that didn't have windows or really outside communications too much, but the word kind of trickled in, and, several of us were kind of going back and forth in between support calls where we could, and during breaks and stuff, kind of out to the parking lot to listen on someone's AM radio, WBBM 780 in Chicago, what was going on, kind of listening at kind of play by play there. So it's definitely kind of a surreal moment. And I don't think, at least for me, it took a while for sort of like the gravity of what had happened to kind of hit, because I think there was just so much conjecture and kind of waiting for facts and stuff to kind of come out. It was like, what exactly happened here? But it's just, I was in the help center. I was a service desk, agent like anyone else, taking my printer won't work calls, and, my pill pack thing won't work, or my baker cell doesn't, deposit drugs into the right thing, like all kinds of stuff. And the dreaded AS400 questions, which I absolutely hated. I could not stand trying to troubleshoot AS400s.
Yeah. So I was also a Windows administrator and or network engineer, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't just confined to Windows, but I was working in New Jersey, about 40 miles from New York City, and someone had mentioned a plane flew into the World Trade Center. At first, I kind of like said, okay, well, I was thinking of like some small stuff, and I'm like, oh, that sucks. Then you hear a second one crash in, and you're like, oh my gosh. So anyway, I guess, in the context of the show, I don't want to drag us down the 9/11 route too much.
Too late.
It's too late now. But, first off, everybody's got their story for that. But second off, it's kind of the disaster that no one ever expected to happen, right? But it's kind of like I remember building these disaster recovery plans, and it was always like, well, what if our data center got hit by an earthquake or something? And it was kind of like, you'd have these conversations and you think almost like, oh, that could never happen. But then you could have like a targeted event like that who knows, maybe something like that could happen. So disaster recovery planning to me has always been something that we do. It's like the insurance policy that you hope you never have to cash in. And so I know that's going to be the topic we talk about today, because now we're in a whole new world with the cloud.
Yeah. You hope for the best, you plan for the worst, right? And I think there's like right now, it's like, okay, well, let's go to the cloud. We don't have to worry about that anymore. Wrong. There's still things you've got to kind of figure out for that kind of thing. We are going to talk about BCP and DR, business continuity planning and disaster recovery for identity infrastructure in the cloud. We're going to introduce our guests here in a minute. I do want to remind people that we've got a few different conferences coming up. We've got Gartner's IAM Summit. Jim, you and I will be there on stage, having conversations with Henrique and Becky, and maybe hopefully putting them into, not hopefully, but trying to, in a good way, put them into a uncomfortable position and ask some kind of tough questions around how Gartner works, maybe.
Can we ask them what they were doing on 9/11?
Yeah. Let's start off on a high note. Thanks, Jim. So we got Gartner coming up. That's in March. It's in Texas. It's earlier this year, so get your tickets early. Come pack the audience, for our session. It'll be very cool to have familiar faces and listeners out there. I'd like to figure out how we can get some listener questions. If you've ever wanted to ask a Gartner person anything, and I mean like just about anything, send them to Jim and I on LinkedIn, hit us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast, or Mastodon at IDAC Podcast, at infosec.exchange. Again, I hate the Mastodon names. I think we're looking to kind of crowdsource. My thought right now is that we kind of bounce back and forth between a question that you and I kind of come up with and something that maybe, listeners maybe have a theme that they want to get, something answered, something like that. So if you've got ideas for, ask a Gartner analyst anything, send it our way. We'll be the filter and make sure we don't put our own careers in jeopardy as part of this process. But, that's coming up. We also got Identiverse. I think you and I are trying to make it out there in May. As well. And then we've got the European Identity and Cloud Conference. That's also, I think it's later in, that's earlier in May, and the Identiverse is in like late May.
Yeah. So. The thought I was having was like, how you always come up with a list of, here's the 20 conferences I'd like my company to spend money to send me to. They say, well, what's your number one? And I always think we should list the European Identity Conference because, what other opportunity would we have to, go to Europe for this job, right? We're pretty much US bound.
Yeah.
Or North America
bound. Yeah. I mean, it's expensive to go anywhere these days. So there's always limits and budgets and stuff like that. So you always have to prioritize. I'm trying to figure out if we can get out to RSA or not. We'll see, but plenty of stuff going on. But why don't we get to our main topic? We've spent the last 9 minutes waxing poetic about sad events in the past. So let's talk about how do we recover, identity infrastructure in the cloud. Let's talk about BCP. Let's talk about DR. And to help us with that conversation, we've got Muli Motola. He's the co-founder and CEO at accSenSe. Welcome to the show, Muli.
Hey, Jeff. Hey, Jim. Thank you for being here. I was hoping to have a hilarious discussion, but you started with 9/11, so let's see how it goes from here.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate that. Why don't we start with sort of your identity origin story? I'm always curious when we have someone on the show for the first time, how they actually got into the IAM world. Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
Well, funny, because I do relate to the 9/11 story. My first real IT job was I was at EMC, working for EMC, specializing at backup, storage, disaster recovery, and I was also consultant for business continuity in disaster processes. And one of the stories that we had regarding 9/11 was that actually two stories interesting and related to our topic. The one is around a guy that was sick at home while his entire team was working one of the buildings, and sadly they all were hit in the crash, and he had to work alone to recover the entire company IT because there was nobody to help him. So the other story is around a company that invested tons of money for disaster recovery planning. They had a full storage working in one of the buildings, and another storage replicated and synced to the second on the other building.
So their backup was in the second building.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that stresses the importance of having a geographic spread for things.
So we actually at EMC, we had a lot of lessons learned from that event, consulting companies on how to build their disaster recovery plans. And what you can also learn that is disaster recovery is not a tool or a hardware or a software. It is actually the good old people, processes, and tools that are required in order to provide a good solution. And all of them are quite providing, requires a lot of thinking.
I think that's a good analogy and kind of draws parallels, right, with identity and access management. It's not just a tool. It's kind of like zero trust, even though apparently zero trust is solved by one tool for a lot of different vendors. You're joining us from a conference that you're at. Are you in Israel right now or somewhere else?
Yeah, actually, I'm a bit exhausted from 3 days in Tel Aviv. My voice is also a bit broken. My company exhibited, showcased in Cybertech TLV. It's a conference that I think it's the 15th time I'm participating in it in various hats, starting from the days I was at EMC, and actually it's kind of close a circle around my career here starting from EMC, and from EMC I moved to several other companies at the corporate of EMC, RSA, and VMware. Once Dell bought EMC, me and a partner of mine, we decided that we want to have a break from all the corporate work, and decided to open our own consulting firm. This consulting firm, and that's maybe what relates to identity management, we actually help companies to analyze the risk going out to the cloud. So we went to banks and insurance companies, fintech companies, helping the risk management team build the risk analysis around moving to cloud. That was part of the government requirements from these companies, and they had to make this study, so we did it for them. And the funny thing is that with all our knowledge around infrastructure, architecture, data centers, and network and storage and compute and everything, the first thing that came up and actually took over 80% of each report was identity management. So we couldn't, I can't explain more. Every step of the report had somehow related to identity management. How do you authenticate a person from a cloud service using his local data center, Azure, Azure wasn't there anymore, and yet Active Directory identity. The solutions were very rare, and this is why we decided to take a look at the market on what are the products that are kind of doing that in that moment. And we were, EMC guys, corporate guys. We knew all the Microsoft and the Symantec and all these big solutions. But then somebody told us, hey, look, there is a small company called Okta from Silicon Valley, and it looks like they're doing something very cool. Maybe you should check them out. So we checked them out, and I immediately fell in love. And I'm telling you, Jeff, I hadn't practiced technical stuff that time for almost 6 years. I was a pre-sales sales engineer and sales account executive and consultant. When I saw Okta, I immediately fell in love. And I told my partner, listen, we're pivoting the company. We're becoming system integrators for Okta. And I am the CTO. And I want to be the implementer. And that's what happened. Going forward 7 years, we had many customers in Israel. We are the biggest system integrator actually for Okta in Israel. And I gained a lot of experience working with the product. I became Okta consultant, and I was part of the team that Okta created in order to build the consultant exam. Don't shoot the messenger. I did plan some nasty questions. So that was my experience with identity management.
And now you're with a company called accSense. Gartner listed you guys as a cool vendor for 2022. So I'm curious what that process looks like. And I guess for people who aren't familiar with accSense, how did you parlay, and I don't want to tease it here, but like you parlayed this sort of Okta expertise into something new. Give us the 30-second, maybe 60-second long elevator ride pitch around kind of what you guys are looking to solve.
Yeah, so part of these 7 years implementing Okta, I figured that this product is becoming more and more central into the company's IT. And actually, not only me identified this and Okta, when companies started really strategically move to cloud, actually it stopped being just a security product, and it has become the infrastructure where the company meets. It's the only place where everybody meets, and the centralized place that manages everything, all the access to the company resources. And the problem that we identified is that it also is a single point of failure. As a single point of failure, we try to understand how we can help customers and ourselves as system integrators back then to overcome this situation. We also identified the problem that the super admin of the system is so strong, yet it's just a user's password and MFA. And we did thought that it's not so hard to trick somebody to lose that. So the use case of a super admin losing access to its admin dashboard of Okta became really annoyed me, and I thought that we need to solve it. So accSense is a spin-off. It's a company that we built in order to solve the problem. First of all, to protect the data within Okta by providing an air gap solution. And secondly, ability to recover the data if somebody mistakenly or maliciously made changes into the system, or in a very, very bad use case where an attacker is actually gaining control over your admin dashboard and you can't access it back. Our solution allows to actually recreate your entire Okta on a secondary tenant, providing disaster recovery for this critical SaaS platform.
So let's talk about DR and disaster recovery and BCP, business continuity planning. I guess for those who aren't familiar, let's just start with, at a very base level, because I think it's more than just a technology, right? It's people and process. How do you define disaster recovery? And then how do you define business continuity planning? Or are we essentially saying the same thing, which is two different sides of the same coin?
Oh, not at all. Actually, when I was a consultant at DMC, there was an NGO called the ITIL. And these guys were training IT managers how to manage their IT infrastructure. And one of the biggest chapters of ITIL, whoever was certified in ITIL, and I sadly had to do it as part of my job in EMC, was business continuity. Business continuity is the, let's say, macro solution that companies have to possess. Every IPO'd company need to have it as part of their ordinary and daily job, and there need to be somebody that is responsible for that. So business continuity is an organizational, it's a business process. It's not even a technical process. Within business continuity, and it's of course related to the fact that business needs to provide continuity of service, both to support its customers and to support its stock owners and the investors, so they can make sure that the company continues doing money, and not just breaks suddenly without any plan to recover. Within business continuity, there are processes that are IT related, and within the IT related processes, there is a special chapter called disaster recovery process, which disaster recovery process is a use case within business continuity, which is, let's say, natural disaster, includes natural disasters or very big disasters like cyber attack and ransomware attacks, which are probably disastrous to the business.
Yeah, I think you've done a really good job of, highlighting the importance that this discipline is not just about tools, right? But at the same time, we are geeks and we are, the Identity at the Center podcast. So we do want to talk tools a little bit. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the biggest things that's changed what we do when it comes to disaster recovery as IT people is, the difference from having the on-prem technology where we built the servers, we controlled the servers, we could back them up, to now we're relying on cloud services, and more specifically, software as a service, where it's more or less a black box. So I'm wondering, and maybe I just answered it, but what's the difference? Can you highlight some of the differences between the old way of doing IT, which, by the way, is still the way we do IT in a lot of enterprises, maybe 50% is still on-prem technology, but now the cloud is introducing all these new things, this black box concept.
Well, I'll give you an example, and I'm looking at it at the use case level. So if, let's say, we have a critical system like identity management system like Okta, and this system holds the entire privileged and access to all the resources in the organization. And an admin mistakenly click on a button he didn't meant to click, and that exposes, contractors to the NetSuite financial application, where they can now access it and see, financial aspects of the customer. This situation, this use case has a technical problem. Somebody did something wrong, and it has an effect on issues that are non-technical. It might be privacy issues, might be even compliance issues, and financial things that were exposed that might even hurt the business. From our perspective as IT admin, this is an operational mistake. It's a misconfiguration caused by an operational mistake. Maybe it's even can happen because of a lag in the browser, and it happened before. There is a lag. You clicked something, you weren't sure, you clicked again, and that sends a put request into the system, which actually deleted an entire group, and that's the effect. On that aspect, with respect to business continuity, probably the business has some commitments. The business has commitments either to his stakeholders or customers, and he needs to recover this situation back and go back to business as fast as possible. Usually that's been done by recovering the data or recovering the action that has been done. Maybe you have a backup of the last configuration. Maybe it's a Terraform script that was run and you need to run the last version again. It includes, first of all, the ability to do the change, and it includes a process that required to be followed. The other scenario might be a malicious attack. A malicious attack on the organization might be the risk or damage might be from 0 to 100, from small change that might be somebody breached into an admin account and changed some other user and gave it privileges to a specific application. I don't know, and with that user, he's gaining more information from the end application without anybody noticing that. So that's one tactic. The second tactic is to ransomware the entire system. In that situation, you're actually losing control of the entire organization. So the question is, what can you do in this situation? Do you have a plan for this? Have you planned this? And I think that's the main question here. If you have tools for this, if you have DIY tools for this, or you build a third-party off-the-shelf tool for this, doesn't matter. First of all, you need to plan for this situation. You need to think about it, and you need to train your people in acting in these kind of situations, which is something that we don't see a lot.
Yeah, I think you're highlighting a couple of key points for me. One is that at the center of any business continuity or disaster recovery plan is the ability to access systems. So IAM is going to be at the center of any, IAM, maybe not like at an enterprise level. I was thinking when you were talking about business continuity, that the most simple level, if you were running a restaurant, right, and all your computer systems went down, maybe you have a backup process. And I remember thinking through, okay, well, maybe it'll take a while to get our IDP online or our IGA system online. So could we do local authentication, things like that? So to me, identity is, got to be it's got to be one of the major use cases you take on from business continuity perspective. I also think, being clear about what your use cases are was your other point. That's incredibly right as well. I was thinking back to my system engineer days, and you get that ticket escalated like, hey, I deleted this important spreadsheet. Can you go and restore it? So you go and find the tape and restore this spreadsheet. That's not disaster recovery, right? That's recovery from someone's stupid error. And it didn't take down the enterprise, and it might be important.
Depends. It could be a disaster for that one person.
Oh yeah. Maybe they're going to lose their job. Who knows? Yeah, or for the next
CEO,
person.
for example.
Yeah. It could be very important for you to get the spreadsheet back. However, it's not part of your disaster recovery plan. So, but identifying the use cases, because I've been thinking about this is one of the main reasons that we wanted to have you on the show is Jeff and I have been going back and forth on is like, okay, well, what would happen if especially malicious attacks? We talk about these ransomware crews, and really what they specialize in is blocking you from being able to access your own information. So maybe they get in and take over all of your domain administrator accounts. Maybe they wipe out your entire user directory. Maybe they go in and wipe out all of your configurations. So I think the use cases of identifying how you're going to deal with all those different scenarios is key. And specific to those use cases, what is realistic where you can have a tool to restore from? And, I would imagine you can't restore passwords, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think you can back up passwords.
Would you even want to?
Or you might not even want to. You might not. You certainly wouldn't want to be able to back them up, I would say. Exactly. Because if you back them up, now you have another instance of that password that can be broken somewhere else. But let's put that aside. I would think, there are certain things that technology can only take you so far. So when we talk about, directory of users, when we talk about configurations, when we talk about certificates and things that would be, maybe part of the secret sauce that you can't even get to. And I think this gets to that black box concept. What is realistic for the IAM practitioner to say, okay, this is what I can use technology for, and this is what I need to have documentation that I'm going to manually do some steps to get back in business.
So you raised so many good topics, and I think the first thing that resonates with what we said is a question that I ask a lot from customers. So every customer knows his availability service level, right? You usually also publish this. If you want to be 5 nines, 4 nines, 3 nines. By the way, we have a newsletter. We call it 5 nines. It was like that. That means my availability. But do you consider access to your system as part of this availability? Or if I jeopardize the access to your system, is it jeopardizing the way that you calculate your availability? And I can ask him it the opposite way. If you can't access your service, even if it's working, is it available? So this is why we focused on identity management. Although business continuity might need other aspects to protect and be able to recover, identity and access management, that's the key and the only gateway to modern organizations. That's the real infrastructure, and everything is built on top of it. Everything from the applications to the device management to the network and zero trust infrastructure, up to the cloud and access to the service itself, and all the engineering and everything. So protecting identity and access management, I think that was the top priority and first thing that you need to recover even if you're looking at a robust business continuity process. And I think also that the 16-year-old guys from Lapsus and the gang from Octopus have identified this problem, how easy it's to bypass an admin which is protected under credentials and MFA and whatever by a simple proxy server. And and that puts the entire question around where can we actually prevent a breach for identity and access management, or are we doing best effort? And then we need to think about what's happening the day after. And when we thought about the day after and what is required in order to recover the system, credentials weren't even a question, because a day after means, first of all, what you're going to do, you're going to ask everybody to reset their password. So
yeah,
why do I need to keep these passwords? But what's the benefit even if I could? And I can't, so I can't read this information from the SaaS provider.
It's kind of that tabletop exercise, right? It's like going through and saying, okay, playing through the chess game of, all right, here's the situation. And by the way, the day after doesn't mean you went home and slept for 8 hours and came back. No, day after is like, oh my gosh, we've been working all night and now the sun's coming up and we're still working. But yeah, it brought up for me, I wanted to raise a question from one of our listeners. His name is Ravi. And Ravi asks, what should he do to prepare for the possibility of an outage? And 3 different types of outages: several hours, several days, or even forever. In other words, what is realistic for the IAM practitioner to consider as possibilities and within the realm of SaaS or ID as a service? And one of the things I want to raise is, like, a lot of times in a disaster, you don't know how long it's going to last, right? So one of the scenarios could be that your IDP has gone down, right? You don't know when it's going to come back up. But then the other scenario might be, you got owned. You know it's not coming back. You know that you're kind of on your own. So I want you to kind of just give us your thought process there on that question from Ravi.
So that's a great question. I don't know what's the size of the company that Ravi works at, but that's related a lot to what's the environment that he lives in, and the use cases that you might consider as dangerous or risky for the company. So a company won't die if there is an outage with the cloud provider for a couple of hours. Yeah. So usually, if it's let's say if it's a workforce, so most of the sessions are still open, and you have mobile apps. So mobile apps doesn't require authentication and each login. There is like a lifetime of the token, which can continue. And most of the time, you wouldn't even feel that unless you need to access to a new application via browser. That's usually the thing. Longer outages, it's tricky. So why is the outage so long? Have the vendor been breached, for example, or I don't know, his data center fell down and he couldn't get it up? That's a real question. And honestly, today, at least at accSense, we do not focus on that scenario, but we are thinking about it. So if I'll take it as one level down, an outage of the vendor means an outage might not even an outage of the entire vendor. It might be a cell or a region that went down and you're part of it. There is no failover between other regions, for example. And that's something that the vendor needs to take care of it, and he needs, and he does. Like most of them are taking care of partial outages of their own data center. The problem that we see in the market at the moment is that none of them is giving a solution for the tenant level outage. So at the vendor level or multi-tenant level, they give a solution. They have backup, they have disaster recovery, they have plans, all is okay. But when it comes to the tenant level, you as a customer, as part of the tens of thousands of customers that the vendor has, they don't bring any solution. And on top of that, they also sign you on a contract called Terms of Service, which has a clause called Shared Responsibility Model. The Shared Responsibility Model states clearly that they are responsible for lots of things, but you're responsible on the data and configuration and identities and devices within the system. And this is where we thought that we can help customers, because they don't have tools to do it, but they are obligated for that aspect.
Yeah, I think the shared responsibility model is an absolute key to kind of think that, okay, we've outsourced the application so we don't have to worry about it anymore. We just handed it off to somebody else. That's way too immature to, and from an information security standpoint, even there's responsibility that goes back and forth in terms of kind of, okay, at the very basic level, I usually think of, okay, that the SaaS vendor may be responsible for the controls that the authentication process is going to work. But if you set your passwords at 6 characters and someone breaks your character or breaks your password string, that's on you, right? And so, I think that's very key. I'm wondering, because not everybody's on Okta. And there may be some organizations that are out there evaluating solutions now. In terms of disaster recovery, in terms of business continuity, what are the questions that they should be asking, including of Okta, in terms of what those vendors provide in this space, or how they approach this problem when they're evaluating which company should we go with in the future?
That's a tricky question, Jim. And when I started the company, many people ask me, "Hey, why are you investing so much here? Okta can bring a team of 10 people and copy what you do in a couple of months, and your business is dead." And then I was talking with the founder of another Israeli startup called Own Backup. Own Backup specializes in providing backup and recovery for Salesforce, and they became unicorn a couple of years ago already. And I wanted to learn from his experience of protecting a SaaS product. And he showed me an article that was issued last, I think, 2 years ago, where it was the third time that Salesforce produced or GA a backup solution, and they pulled it back. It was the third time they pulled back their solution, and the newsletter headline was "Is Salesforce backup enterprise ready?" I think that it's a specialité to know how to build an enterprise-ready backup solution and business continuity solution and disaster recovery solution, because it's more than a tool. You need to understand it's a process, and you need to understand the experience of the user during a process of a disaster. So some of the experience that we bring is not only from Okta or EMC. All of us served in the army, and we have some kind of a combat experience. And as an officer, you know that when you need to take decisions, you need to have a clear understanding of the situation. And this is why we built into the product a war room, an investigation and war room that allows you quickly and easily to identify the environmental effect of the change. And that's something that I'm not sure that the identity management system company will think of when they will provide a backup solution for their system. So anyhow, evaluating a vendor capabilities of having a backup or not, I don't think the right question is, does he have this feature? But does his APIs provide the entire information you need in order to recover? That's a good question I would ask, because we did some analysis for the vendors, and I would not state here who's better than who, but some of them have a very short list of APIs that allows us to extract the data that is required in order to provide a good backup for their system. So if to answer your question, I think the API is maybe the key point here when evaluating a vendor.
Yeah, the API. Also, I think getting a sense for whether or not the vendor, the identity as a service vendor, considers disaster almost like you're asking a silly question. Why would we ever have a disaster, right? Or if they really thought through it, because like enterprise software, it's not about like, okay, I think if I heard that Microsoft wasn't thinking about a disaster, how they would react to a disaster, that would keep me up at night. I think Microsoft's kind of landed at the too big to fail stage, and sure, they are geographically dispersed, but there are some things that go beyond their control, and I would be hopeful. So I guess my question to you is, have you found that as you've talked to SaaS and identity as a service vendors, or where you hear about things, you mentioned the On Backup friend of yours. Do you find that the vendors are welcoming to having disaster recovery solutions be brought into the marketplace for their software?
So you're putting me into the corner here.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast.
We ask the tough questions.
I thought it's a technical guy. Well, I think that's a business question. It's not a technical question here. A company which is IPO'd, I don't know if they will be interested in having their own capabilities and the effort being invested in something that will not improve their top revenue line. And disaster business continuity usually is a cost rather than a revenue generator. So unless we prove differently. By the way, maybe we can provide them different answers. What happens today is that all the compliance companies, the auditors for SOC 2, SOX, these kind of compliance questions, they start to ask the questions, the right questions. Like up till now, they ask the nice questions, but now they're starting to ask the right questions. So I've seen many customers saying that things have changed. In the past, they were asked, hey, what are the critical systems that you have? I see Okta. Do you have a backup for Okta? So they used to say, yeah, Okta does backup to herself. So I have a backup to Okta. That was okay as regarding to the auditor. But now, they're starting to ask the tough question, can you recover your Okta? And suddenly we get more and more calls from customers. And we actually get referrals from Okta also. So that means that they are okay with having us on board. And I'm getting more and more calls from other vendors that are interested in our solution. And by the way, there is another Israeli company, very, very good, called Simperis, that is doing the same for Active Directory, and now for Azure Active Directory also. So we're in our baby steps, but they are really mature in doing so. And I feel that Microsoft are embracing them. So this is how the sentiment from the market that I feel.
And the way I kind of look at it is like, okay, there's probably like a check the box. Yes, we can back it up. Yes, it's whatever, restore it. How good it is, debatable, right? Kind of depends. I mean, I'm trying to put into, terms that maybe might feel, I can play World of Warcraft without mods. Do I want to play World of Warcraft without mods? No. Or I can drive a car that doesn't have a radio. Do I want to drive a car that doesn't have a radio? No. Right? I think there's levels of survival that really only the organization can answer to say what is acceptable for us. And I think this is where not only the technology but the people in the process. It's really important to have tabletop exercises, right? If you've never really executed your disaster recovery plan or your BCP plan or whatever it may be, you hope that you never use it, but you also don't want to go into it and say, oh, okay, we have it looks good on paper, but it didn't work in the real world, right? So I think the importance of having tabletop exercises to kind of walk through, here's what would happen, et cetera. I think a lot of companies discover that there are issues that creep up over time or they didn't account for as part of that plan. So I think it's important to go through that. And you mentioned Simperis. We've had Gil Kirkpatrick on with us. I think it was episode 110. Seems like ages ago. But yeah, they have a very good product that looks at Active Directory, right, for the backup perspective, same way that you're looking at from Okta. And it's an interesting spot to be in because I wonder where things are going now, right? Where everyone is moving to the cloud or says they want to move to the cloud. At what point, what is the future for BCP and DR look like for those types of services, whether it's SaaS or some sort of platform as a service or whatever it may be? I'll give you my 2 cents. Right now, I feel like it's going to be good enough is probably where built-in BCP and DR will end up, but there will be a spot where it's not good enough for certain organizations, or there are certain components of that shared model that you referenced, which I don't think a lot of people really realize. It's like, oh, well, if Okta goes down, they'll bring it back up and we'll be good. Like, no. There are things you need to do, whether it's Okta, Ping, ForgeRock, Microsoft, name it, whatever it may be. There is always something that you as the tenant holder, the customer, the client, whatever you want to call it, will have to restore. And I think that's where these sort of, value add services can really add a lot of value to say, is that something that we want to take on internally as a core competency, or is there a solution that helps us bridge, that gap between the two? And I'm curious from your perspective, having been in the space, where do you see things going?
So Jeff, I think that you're correct. So being prepared for this situation is something that you need to work on, and it's continuous working. Again, it's not only a tool. A tool can bring you a lot of efficiency in doing that. But being proactive with preparing to a cyber attack like this, I think it's critical. And when you start thinking on the sandbox around how this situation goes, all the questions start to pop up. So how long do I allow myself to be down? How much data do I need in order to recover to appropriate time, which is sufficient for me to continue working? How many times I need to train my people for this kind of scenario? They need to be trained, right? They can't just fall into the situation and be ready to react. We all want peace of mind. Yeah. So peace of mind comes if you prepare, not if you. And I feel at the moment that many customers don't want to hear the truth. And if they don't hear it, they don't need to plan for it. And the ones that are more, let's say, ready to listen, and it's not like in situation where we have early adopters here. It's not early adopters. It's people that are more experienced. For example, one of our first customers, he immediately got into a role. He was an IT manager of an on-prem company, a very secured cyber company. And then he moved to a company which is basically not cyber, making project management tools. But yet his first decision was, I want a backup of all my SaaS environments. So he just shopped out of the shelf whatever he could, and he started doing processes in order to back up by themselves the rest of the critical information, what they felt is critical. So I feel that at the moment, people are doing whatever they can if they are serious enough and take this job seriously. And do it yourself is quite hard. And for that, I want to relate to what you asked about the SaaS and where it goes. So as opposed to backing up storage, block level backup, or even file level backup, or database backup, or virtual server backup, in SaaS, we don't really know what happens behind the scene. It's a black box. It's the closed garden or whatever. And we need to guess. And we have only what the vendor provides us using his REST API facility. So the job is hard. You need to know the system intimately, because backup is only one step. We used to ask people, I understand you can back up, but can you recover? In order to recover, it's a totally different question. To recover, you need to have enough data and to know that this data is consistent. Maybe you have data, but it's not consistent. Maybe you have from one point in time part of the data and a partial from other point in time. They need to be interconnected. There is a sequence in writing back into the API the data in order to recover. So you need to be very intimately aware of whatever SaaS product you're protecting. This is why I don't see companies like producing, hey, I'm a platform that can back up all the SaaS platforms that you work with. Because first of all, there are endless SaaS platforms, and you need to know them intimately. So we actually had to reverse engineer their database in order to be able to keep the data consistent and with all the required information that is required in order to recover. So this market, it's currently being slowly consolidated using M&As. That's what's going on at the moment in the market. And I guess it will take time until you will see conglomerates in this area.
You mentioned a really important distinction, I think, is the difference between backup and recovery. And I think that's something that, we've been talking here now for like 55 minutes, and I feel like that's the nugget. It only took us 55 minutes to get there. There's one thing people out there should be listening to. It's that particular part. Yes, you can back up, but can you recover? It doesn't matter if you can back up if you can't also do the recovery. So I feel like that's where we should probably end the conversation, because I don't think it'll get better than that. But I wanted to, ask Jim, you really started off on a downer. I feel like we have brought it up a little bit, but let's try to pull it all the way back up and end on a lighter note. Muli, we were kind of talking beforehand, and I gave you a couple choices on what we wanted to go with to kind of end on a lighter note. And the one that we're going with is, and this will be a question for all of us to answer, is imagine you can instantly learn any language. Which would you choose? And I'm going to throw in and why. Muli, you go first.
Yeah, well, I come from a part of the world which is, let's say, that's the origin of the culture. And one of the first cultures that actually started to write and tell stories, it was an empire called Assyria, or Ashur in Hebrew, that's how we call it. And actually, they brought the entire Semitic language into life. And Hebrew, by the way, is like kind of a subsidiary of that language. And they have stories that you tell your kids today, but in a different flavor. They invented everything. They invented all the legends. They invented all the stories of the religious acts and everything. And one of the things that I would love to do is to be able to read their in their origin language, whatever they wrote. It's by the way, if you're an archaeologist, it's one of the mandatory languages you have to learn. So that was my dream, which never came true.
Jim, how about yourself? What's a language you'd like to learn?
So I'm going to be boring and pragmatic about this. I've traveled a fair amount outside of the country, and every place I've gone, I wish, I'm in Holland, I wish I could speak Dutch, or I'm in Belgium or France, and I wish I could speak French, or I'm in Germany, I wish I could speak German, or, in Asia, I haven't done that much travel in Asia, but in South Korea, I wish I could speak Korean. That's, a couple of those languages I would have no hope of ever learning. But I took Spanish in high school. I know some words, I know the sentence structure, and I'm confident that given enough time and effort, I could master that language. So the other part of the pragmatism of it is, I go to Mexican restaurants like all the time. They're very common in the US. There's a fair amount of Spanish speaking population in the US, and I feel like I'd get to actually use it. Plus, a lot of my favorite vacation destinations are Spanish speaking areas. So I'm going to go with Spanish. I know it's a boring answer, but that's my pick.
Super boring, super utilitarian. I admire anybody who can learn more than one language. I haven't even figured out English yet, and that's my primary language. So my hat's off to anyone who speaks more than one, even decently. That's fine. I know a few Spanish swear words from working in restaurants, so I feel like I've learned enough Spanish there. And I'm going to come up with the stupid fun answer. I'd like to learn like Elvish or Klingon or something like that, so I can spot my fellow nerds out there and have something. I'm getting the thumbs up from Muli. He's with me on that one. Something completely like useless, but a unique skill, right? I guess would be the look at it, if you really want to call it a skill.
But Jeff, you have the universal translator. I mean, what do you?
I've tried all over the world with Google Translate, so I've got that. There's earphones now that will do live, translation for you into your language. Technology is awesome. It's just going to keep getting better. But okay, I feel like that's a better way we can kind of leave things. Muli, you've been really generous with your time. Really appreciate you being part of this. We're going to have show notes and our links in our show notes, for folks to connect with Muli on LinkedIn, for more about accSenSe. It's accSenSe. Well, let me do that over. accSenSe.io. And Muli, I got one quick question for you. There's 2 S's that are capitalized and the rest aren't. Is there a story behind that?
Well, first of all, accSenSe was a merge of access and sense, like to make sense of all the access that we learned about. And when I saw that there are 2 S's, and then I said, maybe we're talking about SAS, right? And SAS, we used to write it like S, capital S, A, and capital S. So I kind of keep that, but my marketing is saying it's too... it's not going well with the papers. So
hey, Jeff and I worked for a company called Identropy I was there for 9 years, and everybody a lot of people mispronounced it, And there was a whole story that you tried to explain to people that they would look at you even more confused than when you started the story. So, yeah, I think you stick to your guns, man. We made it, Identropy was from like 06 to 20, so like 15 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then we got bought out by Protivity, and that's a story for another day. So, yeah. All right, let's go ahead and leave it there for this week. Muli, thanks so much for being with us. Jim, thanks for your time. You can find us on the web. We're at idacpodcast.com. We're on Twitter at IDAC Podcasts. We're on Mastodon at IDAC Podcast at infosec.exchange. Starting to see more people on Mastodon actually starting to follow the show there, which is pretty cool. And you can always connect with Jim and I on LinkedIn. Again, the call out there is for if you could ask a Gartner analyst anything, and I mean anything, send them our way on any of those channels. And we'll try to include that as part of our thought process for how we want to design this Gartner show that we're going to be doing. So, and don't forget that like and subscribe button. That helps us out immensely, especially since we really don't have a marketing budget and everything is here is word of mouth. So share it with your friends and enemies. We don't care who you share it to as long as they're listening. That's cool with us. So we'll go ahead and leave it there for this week. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
Thank you, Jeff and Jim.
Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.